Welcome to the Real Fast Spanish Tips podcast. If you're interested in achieving a conversational level in Spanish and want to learn more, check out realfastspanish.com. Welcome to episode 3 of the Real Fast Spanish Tips podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Barr. This is part 3 of a 3-part series on the 3 Ds of language learning. So if you're listening for the first time, make sure you go back and listen to the first 2 tips. So the third tip of language learning is doing. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you turn theory into action. If I refer back to the boat metaphor, which I brought up in tip 2, action or doing is where the miles get covered towards your destination. It's where you make course corrections. It's where you lock in the good practice that you've been doing. So if definition is the destination, desire is the engine, then doing is the movement. I've set up the first 3 podcasts in this way so that you can get a feel for these 3 Ds of language learning to help you get to your goals faster. I talked about how language learning is delayed gratification, like losing weight, quitting smoking, or getting fit. It's just the same. And having these 3 skills of defining things really well, having the desire, and then going out and doing them will help you get to your goals faster. The one thing that separates the other examples, though, of what I've given you, losing weight, quitting smoking, or getting fit, there are often triggers that force you to get moving. Maybe you get to a certain weight, or you've been smoking so long and there are a few signs that maybe it's affecting your health. So you decide that it's time to take action on achieving those things. Language learning doesn't happen like that. Unless you have a looming deadline, say you need Spanish for work and in a hurry, then there'll be no reason to put yourself into action to put what you've learned to the test. If you go back to the reason why I do anything at Real Fast Spanish, it's about helping you find the fastest way to reach a conversational level in Spanish. So this is why these first 3 tips are so important. There are lots of students out there that want to know how they can get there faster. They would love to find a way to reduce the learning curve. If you're one of those students, then I strongly suggest that you become familiar with the 3 Ds of language learning. Because if you do, I know you'll be able to get to a conversational level faster. If you ever find yourself slowing down or your progress isn't as you would like it to be, chances are you haven't got a clear definition of what you're trying to achieve. You don't have the desire to learn Spanish quickly, or you can't get into the doing, converting theory into action, which is what today's tip's about. I have a really good friend of mine who's been learning Spanish for a while, and when I speak to her, her vocabulary is vast and her grammar is precise. Yet when she gets into a practical situation, she freezes up. She hasn't spent enough time putting what she's learned in a textbook or in a classroom into action. The doing part or the action part is critical when it comes to language learning. So I have another quote I have for today is by St. Augustine. God provides the wind, but man must raise the sails. Now, this is another really good action quote, and it's also relevant because it works really well with my boat metaphor. I have another really good friend who can speak about 5 languages. He has an incredibly simple yet powerful strategy when it comes to the doing part of language learning. When he's learning a new language, he carries around with him a small notepad in his top pocket. And when he discovers a new word, he writes it down with the intention that the following day he challenges himself to then use that word in context or a situation. So he has to manufacture a situation where he can use that word that he's learned. A really powerful strategy, but he knows that in order to get to the 5 languages he's been able to learn, he's had to put all of the theory that he's learned into action, and this is one of his key strategies. So I have 4 steps today to help you with taking action. Number 1, work on your definition. Go back to episode 1 and work out exactly what your definition is of what you're trying to achieve. If you're struggling to take action, if you're struggling with the doing part of language learning, then you may have a problem with your definition. Step 2, work on your desire. If you're struggling to find the energy to take action and overcome inertia, you may need to go back and work on your desire levels. Again, go back and have a listen to tip 2 again if you're struggling with this. Step 3 is start to understand some of the theory behind willpower. Now, willpower for me has been a fascinating topic, and I've read 2 books in the last 2 months on the topic. The first one is The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It was a really great book, and I actually wrote a post about it, which I'll also put a link to, on using willpower to help you with your Spanish. The other book, which I read this week, was Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength. It was a really, really good book, and I highly recommend it. The basic idea that I got out of this book is that willpower is a limited resource. You get a certain amount of it each day, and when you spend it, you basically run out, and by the end of the day, your willpower will be depleted. And even the small things that you would normally easily be able to do start to become more challenging. So in that book, the author gives a number of tips for helping to develop your willpower muscle. But the basic one is that I found was just to be more well rested. Get a good night's sleep, eat well, and then do the most important things first. So if, like me, you're a late night studier, I often do a lot of my work late at night, you may find that a switch to first thing in the morning is actually easier if you're struggling to take action. Anyway, I'll have a link to that book in the show notes, and you can check it out if you'd like. Step number 4 for helping you take action is to start forming an action habit. So habits can take a while to form, but once they're there, then it's perfect for maintaining momentum and getting into the habit of taking action as often as you can. When you start to take action every day on your Spanish training, then over time, this will just become a natural part of your process, and you'll be able to reach that conversational level faster. So yesterday, I put up a post on Real Fast Spanish on the English to Spanish cognates. One of the best things about learning Spanish as an English speaker is there are so many words that are exactly the same. It's a great advantage that you have when you're learning Spanish from English, is that there are a lot of words that you already have in your vocabulary. So in that post, I talked about 2 types of cognates. There are basically perfect cognates, which are words that are pretty much exactly the same in Spanish and English. An example would be fatal, which is spelled exactly the same, but just said with a Spanish accent. So fatal would become fatal. Error in English becomes error in Spanish. And horrible in English becomes horrible in Spanish. Another example is near perfect cognates, which is, for example, perfect, which becomes perfecto. And in English, delicious, which becomes delicioso in Spanish. So my action challenge for you today is to go to that post. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Find 5 words, say from the near perfect cognates, and then use them in a sentence. You have to use them for them to stick. So find someone that you know that's also learning Spanish. And if you can't do that, use them on a friend or a family member, or even record them into your computer or your phone. That way, you've converted some theory into action. All right, that ends today's tip. How can you improve your doing muscle? Head over to the blog. This episode is going to be at www.realfastspanish.com/doing. In the next tip, I'm going to talk about conversation hacking. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak with you soon.